Hello everybody and welcome back to another video by Funlearn Tutorials. We have already discussed that a game in a dynamic form, that is a sequential game, can be converted into a format that looks somewhat like a static form game. Again, I am saying that this does not change the game itself, that is, it does not make a dynamic game into a static game. I am just saying that it looks like a static game. And we are trying to find out what happens if we forcefully convert a dynamic game represented aptly through a game tree formation and solved by backward induction is transformed into a static game. So as I've explained in my previous video, I will be linking them in the top right corner of the screen as well as in the description box below. I have converted this dynamic form game into a static representation of a matrix form. I highly suggest that you have a look at that video. That will give you a clear or a very brief but yet clear explanation of how we get this matrix. Now that we know how to convert a dynamic form into a static representation, we try to find out how we would solve this game if it were a solid static game. Now when we see this matrix, let us first start from the choice of player 2. We can start from either way. Let us just arbitrarily choose from player 2. So if player 1 chooses capital A, we look at this row. So we'll first look at this row. We assume that player 1 chooses capital A. If player 1 chooses capital A, player 2 will look at the second numbers of the first row. So player 2 will look at 2, 2, 4 and 4. Now player 2 realizes that 4 is greater than 2. So it will choose 4 and 4 from here because that is greater than 2 comma 2. That is, if player 1 chooses capital A, player 2 will have a greater inclination of choosing this strategy. So this becomes the dominant strategy in this case. Again, if player 1 chooses capital B, player 2 will compare between 2, 3, 2 and 3. And player 2 realizes, since here 2 was less than 4 and here 2 is less than 3, so player 2 will make sure that he or she ends up with the 3 payoff. So what player 2 will do is, player 2 will try to choose this cell. So player 2 will choose this 3 and this 3. So let me just remove this. This was in respect to player 1 choosing capital A. So let me just keep it like this. So these are the situations. So if player 1 chooses capital A, player 2 will tend to choose BA or BB, which will give him or her a utility of 4. And if player 1 chooses capital B, player 2 will tend to choose small AB or small BB, which will give him or her the payoff of 3 comma 3. Since we are looking at player 2, we will look at the second numbers as considered. This is what happens if we look at player 2. Now let's look at player 1. So if player 2 chooses small a small b, that is player 2 chooses this particular strategy, then player 1 will look at 3 and 8. And since 8 is greater than 3, player 1 will tend to choose capital B because it will give him or her a higher payoff of 8. Similarly, if player 2 chooses AB, then player 1 will compare between 3 and 3 and will realize they are both indifferent. So I do not mind. Since 3 and 3 is equal, if player 2 chooses small a small b, player 1 can choose either capital A or capital B. It does not matter. If player 2 chooses small b small a, player 1 compares between 2 and 8 and finds out that 8 is greater than 2. So player 1 will then choose capital B. Finally, if player 2 chooses small b, then player 1 sees, okay, 3 is greater than 2, so let me choose 3, and then player 1 will decide capital B. So since 3 is greater than 2. So you can see that player 1 and player 2 decides on their choices based on what the other player does and accordingly decides what he or she will do based on which gives a higher payoff. Now you can see that there are exactly 2 cells where both the numbers are underlined. Let me just highlight those 2 cells. So one is this cell where both 3 and 3 are highlighted. Again, another is this cell which is both 3 and 3 are highlighted. Let us understand which strategies it corresponds to. So if we look at the strategies of player A, it both player 1, it both corresponds to strategy B. Now if we look at player 2's strategy, one corresponds to small a small b and the other corresponds to small b small b. So there is an inconsistency, right? If we look at the backward induction, the result was player 1 will choose capital B and player 2 will choose small b. Here we can see that should have corresponded to this outcome, right? Both have chosen capital B, both have chosen B, that is the player 1 has chosen capital B and player 2 has chosen small b. That should have been the case, right? It doesn't look very acceptable. Something else is happening. There are two outcomes. What is going on? So you can see that if you convert a dynamic game into a static representation, there arises some anomalies, there arises some controversies. In the next video, we will try to understand exactly what happened. So essentially what we find out that there is some problem. What happens, why does the problem arise, and how do we solve it?